discuss the economics of broadcast media ownership and operations in Nigeria. Economics of broadcast media. Now, it says discuss the economics of broadcast media ownership and operations in Nigeria. So within this particular question, we have economics of broadcast media, and then we have broadcast media ownership and operations. So what do we mean by economics of broadcast media? First, we are talking about issues that have to do with income and expenditure, as it has to do with radio houses, television houses, radio stations, television stations. Economics of broadcast media ownership and operations talks about income and expenditure issues as it has to do with radio and television stations. Economics is basically about what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. That's the classical, definition of economics. They call these three questions basic problems of economics. Economics has to do with making choices on how to allocate resources, especially scarce resources. It has to do with efficiency in terms of production content, in terms of distribution, in terms of what you do to earn income. So that's economics. And when it has to do with the broadcast media, it is saying, how do we make money as a broadcast organization? How do we get the right staff? How do we employ the right hands? How do we buy equipment? How do we even make money beyond advertising? That's what economics of broadcast media ownership is talking about. Not just let me go and get license from NBC, for instance, so that I can, buy a transmitter and start running a radio station. The question is, how do I sustain this radio station? That's what we mean when we say economics of the broadcast media. When we talk about broadcast media ownership, we're talking about funding of broadcast media. Of course, media ownership refers to the possession and control of a medium of communication. Ownership has to do with how a specific medium of communication, whether it is radio or television or newspaper, is funded or financed, how it is managed, who calls the shots, especially in terms of control, among others. Ownership could be by an individual or an organization or even government. The fact is, ownership has to do with a possession and control of a specific medium. Ownership in terms of how do we take decisions on who to employ, the person that funds the broadcast media, the person that funds a radio station, for instance, that's the owner. The person that decides who to employ, for instance, Amin Musali is the owner of Nigeria Info, Cool FM, and Wazobia FM. Amin Musali is the owner of these radio stations in Nigeria, just like you also have Nduka Obaibwena, who is the owner of Arise TV channel, Arise magazine, and of course This Day newspaper. So we're talking about broadcast media ownership here. So when you say broadcast media ownership and operation, the person that owns a radio station is bothered about how to sustain that radio station, how to raise money to pay salary, how to maintain equipment, how to even ensure that the right programs are produced with an impressive quality so that the audience will listen to the programs. That's why you see radio stations hiring such personalities as Toke Makinwa, that they freeze, to come to their station and be on-air personalities, because such persons attract so many listeners to the radio station. And this is an economic issue because it has to do with raising money, making profit, sustaining a media house. So when we say economics of broadcast media ownership and operations, it's talking about the people who own radio stations and television stations. What bothers them in terms of how to allocate scarce resources? That is to say, resources here has to do with material and human resources. That is, human resources in terms of the staff you hire, who do you hire, how many staff members will you have, and then material resources, which equipment do we buy, which offices do we build, do we expand to other states? For instance, you have Nigeria Info FM in Port Harcourt, you have it in Abuja, you have it in Lagos. So these are economic issues because they have to do with income and expenditure. So economics is concerned with production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. And when it has to do with broadcast media, we're talking about goods here have to do with the programs that you're listening to, the news items, and then various contents of the broadcast media. These are the products. These are the products that you sell to the public. And then you are interested in selling to the public because you want to have high number of audience, and this will attract advertisers to your station. So when you talk about economics of broadcast media, it has to do with making choices on allocation of resources, especially scarce resources. Of course, individuals, businesses, governments, and even nations bother about how to allocate material and human resources and then put them to good use to make profit. The same applies to broadcast media. They want to make profit, and they are bothered about how to make profit. They are bothered about government laws that could prevent them from, excelling, or that could make them close down, because if you go against the rules of, for instance, National Broadcasting Commission, they could close down your station. It has an economic tie, because if your station is closed down, you lose money. So you are bothered about the economic environment in the nation entirely. What laws affect the economy? Policies that affect the economy generally can also affect your own media house. If, for instance, government says no more importation, for instance, or importation of specific items, and those items affect your organization, that could affect production. If it has to do with maybe they say broadcast equipment, there are kinds of equipment you can't buy from outside, that will affect your station. So what we're saying is you have to keep scanning the environment to see whether there are economic policies of government at macro level. That is the one that affects the entire nation, is called macroeconomics, macroeconomic level. When it affects the entire nation, it is macro level, macroeconomics. But microeconomics has to do with the one that affects the individuals, the behavior of individuals in terms of how they spend, how much they have. That is microeconomics. So if you are in a country that many people are getting poor, like this coronavirus pandemic affected many people, not just in Nigeria, many parts of the world, you find out that many persons may stop subscribing to certain cable service providers. Certain companies may stop spending so much money on adverts. So that's what we're talking about when you say micro and macro economy. You also get bothered about how the economy looks, whether at macro level, that is the whole nation, or at micro level, that is individuals. When workers are old, they have little money, and then they won't be able to subscribe to certain stations, even if, of course, most television channels now exist on cable TV. Do they subscribe? Do they watch your channels? That's a challenge. Now, these are economic issues that bother the owners and operators of broadcast media. So when we say economics of the broadcast media, we're talking about issues that have to do with income, efficiency, what to produce. That is to say, which programs do we produce? What kind of contents do we have? Do we focus on sports programs? Do we focus on entertainment programs? Do we even do reality TV shows like Big Brother Naija and all that? And then how to produce? That is to say, what kind of program? Is it going to be phone-in program? Is it going to be a live program, recorded program? Okay, what kind of program do we bring people to the studio to do that? I'm talking about for broadcast media, because we're looking at broadcast media here. Do we bring people to the studio to be part of the program, or do we even have social media channels so that people can come in through social media platforms like Facebook? Even they can reach us on Instagram and all that. Or do we even have, like these days, radio stations have facilities that people can use to even view what's happening in the station? Nigeria Info FM, for instance, and many other stations, radio stations in Nigeria, you see the broadcasters. It's not like before when radio you just listen to the set, but if you want to watch them, you can watch them. These are just things that you do to boost the opportunity to make more money and to have more audience. These are economic issues that bother media owners and all that. It's not just about getting advert. No, media economics is beyond just getting advert. That's a major concern, advert revenue. But keeping the station running is important. Paying staff, getting the right equipment, making sure that you take decisions on what to produce, how to produce, and then for whom to produce, the target audience. You don't just own a radio station and then go on air and start. You don't even know your audience. Are you talking about music station? Like I keep giving an example with Nigeria Info FM. That is one of the best radio stations in Nigeria. They call themselves news, sports, and talk radio station. Many radio stations are music stations. They play music, and that means they are targeting certain kinds of audience. Maybe the youth. That is if they are playing more of hip hop and co. But there is classic FM that plays more of classic music. So they are bringing in, the old adults. People like such stations. So for whom to produce? What kind of audience should we have? You consider that, because it's an economic decision. Because if you don't have the right audience, it's going to be difficult to make money. You will just jump into the media industry, broadcasting industry, and then you just be floating because you're not targeting a specific audience. You're not. If it is television station, do you have programs that can target maybe the students or target, the middle class? What kind of programs do you have? Okay, do you want to operate a movie channel so that something like maybe Africa Magic, and then you base it on just movies? You need to understand the nature of your audience, the dynamics of your audience. So the broadcast media owners are bothered by such decisions in Nigeria, just like every other country. That is, we're talking about economic decisions. So their main headache is on how to allocate resources for production, distribution, consumption of media content. How do we distribute our contents? I've mentioned that. Do we just do phone-in programs? Do we do promo for our various programs? Do we have social media platforms? Like most radio and television stations these days, even in Nigeria, they have social media platforms. How do we distribute these programs? How do we, what kind of transmitter do we have so that we can have wider reach? So distribution matters too. And then some other radio stations and television stations, some do shows, live shows, that is meet the on-air personality, or they can do, they can invite some people in the music industry to join them. They could even go to social sports, that is their on-air personalities will go to social sports and then do live programs there. These are ways to raise money, and these are economic issues. Now, of course, we have said you have to always be in touch with the economic policies in the country to be sure that decisions taken at that level will not affect your company. Even if they affect your company, you have to take decisions on how to overcome such challenges. So basically, economics has to do with land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. And this applies to the broadcast media. That is land, that is to say, where do we build our station? How do we get the station positioned? Which places do we establish our station? Labor, the hands you employ. That is, some stations have just very few hands. Because it's in radio, you may not have so many persons you can operate even in a small room. Just have a good transmitter and then very few hands, and then you follow up stories from other stations. Capital, that is to say, well, do we get money to run the station? How do we pay salary? How do we earn income? Entrepreneurship is talking about the skill set. What kind of on-air personalities do we invite? What kind of programs do we have? And then who are the ones that will run the program?